It gives me great pleasure to welcome you, First Minister and member of the Scottish Cabinet, here to Inverclyde. For those who haven't been here before, this town hall, the municipal buildings around us, are a legacy of the area's prosperous industrial maritime heritage. They were built at a time when Greenock and Inverclyde were the centre of the Industrial Revolution and the global expansion of the British Empire. We may be one of the smallest local authorities in Scotland, but we have big ideas, big plans to deliver the quality of life our communities expect and deserve. We have invested an unprecedented £270 million in our schools, creating the best possible environments for our children and young people to be nurtured, taught and guided towards achieving their full potential. We are one of the highest levels in Scotland of young people going on to positive destinations when they leave school. We have worked closely for local partners to develop and enhance our maritime infrastructure and cultural resources. Greenock is now the official #1 port of the cruise ship passengers. And that's a record that's set to be built on thanks to the City Deal investment and the continued hard work of Peel Ports. We are working hard to put Inverclyde on the map for sporting and community events, and to get the message across that riverside living is a great choice for people to escape to, leave the city grind and bring up their families. And your decision to come here today, the biggest turnout I understand by members of the public at all your cabinet sessions across the country. It shows how the people of Inverclyde are engaged in politics and the decisions affecting their daily lives. I think that's great for democracy, to allow the Scottish Government decision makers to answer directly for those decisions. Thank you to the members of your Cabinet for coming here today, and I hope you've had a taste of the challenges and opportunities in Inverclyde. Thank you too for the many hundreds of people who have attended here tonight. I'd also like to give a special thanks to MSP Stuart McMillan, who knows Stuart the first to write, the Cabinet Secretary, to get him to come here. So Stuart, thank you for that. Without further ado, can I hand you over to Joe Fitzpatrick, MSP Minister for Parliamentary Affairs.
Thank you very much, Provost Moran. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Cabinet are delighted to be here in Greenock for what is the 9th public meeting we've held out with Edinburgh this year, and I think it is, as the Provost said, the largest that we have ever held. Since coming to office, this government has been committed to holding cabinets across the length and breadth of Scotland. We want to be the most open and accessible Scottish government ever. That was a pledge the First Minister made when she came to office last year, and last Thursday was exactly a year since that appointment. So this is your opportunity to ask questions about local or national issues and about the work of the Scottish Government. In a moment, we'll hear from the First Minister. We'll then open the floor for your questions, and then we hope you could join us for refreshments after, where you'll be able to continue discussions with individual Cabinet Ministers. So, without any further ado, will you please welcome your First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, MSP.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Provost and Joe, for your introduction, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you here this evening. I want to start tonight by saying just a few words about the dreadful terrorist attacks that took place in Paris just 10 days ago, partly because it's very fitting that in the wake of the horror that unfolded on the streets of Paris just over a week ago, that we should be holding this public discussion here in Greenock tonight. Because Greenock, of course, is rightly very proud of the support it gave to France throughout the Second World War, when Greenock served as the naval base for the Free French Fleet and as home to more than 1,000 French sailors. In 1942, General de Gaulle visited Greenock on Christmas Eve, and I'm told that he acted as Santa at a Christmas party for the French sailors, and children from Greenock High helped to decorate the Christmas tree. The Marseillaise, the French national anthem, was played as he walked into the venue. And I think there's 2 points worth making about these connections between Greenock and France. The first is that countries and communities right around the world have shown in recent days that we all stand shoulder to shoulder with France and with the French people. And Scotland has played its full part in that. And it's very clear from gestures like the Book of Condolence that is here tonight that Greenock is again doing its bit. That's not at all surprising, but it is admirable and it's great to see. So thank you very much to you, the people of this town. But the second point is about the fact that Greenock was home to more than 1,000 French sailors. They were welcomed with open arms by this community back then. In fact, when the Maille Brise frigate sank near here in 1940, townspeople flocked with gifts like coats, shirts, boots for the survivors who'd lost all of their clothing and all of their belongings. Now, earlier today, I had occasion to think about that when I visited the Rainbow Family Centre and met there refugees from Afghanistan who have settled recently into the Inverclyde community. And I know that this area is also likely to welcome some refugees from Syria in the near future. And I also know that in the wake of what happened in Paris, there is some public concern about that. And it is, to some extent, understandable. But I think what we've got to remember is that the refugees we welcome to Scotland and will welcome to Scotland have endured experiences that we can scarcely begin to imagine. And they are fleeing the type of people who committed the atrocities that we saw in Paris. And all developed countries have a part to play in helping them. And I'm determined that Scotland will do that, but the reality is we can only do that with the assistance and with the goodwill of councils and local communities. And it was clear to me from my meeting today that Greenock and Inverclyde is once again offering a warm welcome to people who have come here in a time of great extremity and hardship. So on behalf of everybody in the Scottish Government, I want to thank Inverclyde Council and the people of Inverclyde. You're helping people who desperately need our assistance, and in doing so, I think you're living up to a fine tradition of humanity and compassion. I also want to thank all of you for coming here tonight. It's fantastic to see more than 400 people on a Monday night, on a not particularly nice Monday night, here to talk about politics, about government, about governance, and about the local and national issues that matter most to all of you. I'm reliably informed that this is actually the biggest of the public meetings that we've heard as the Cabinet has toured around Scotland. So that's something that you can make as a claim to fame in the future. But this practice of us getting out and about around the country is, as Joe has just said, one of the ways in which we're meeting the pledge that I made when I became First Minister. The pledge that I made then was that I would do everything I can to lead the most open and accessible government that we've ever had in Scotland. So it follows from that the main purpose of this event tonight is not for you to listen to us, although you're going to have to do it for a little while longer, but it's not the main purpose of the event tonight. The main purpose is for us to listen to you. That's why most of the time we've got here this evening is set aside for you to ask us questions. And I want to stress, and I always stress this at the start of these public meetings, because sometimes people are quite surprised by this. You can ask anything at all. We don't vet your questions or screen them in advance. You can ask about any subject you want, and we'll do our best to answer your questions as openly and as frankly as we possibly can. It might be that we can't provide an immediate answer to the question you're asking. It might be particularly detailed or a particularly specific question. If that's the case, we will undertake to get back to you with a full answer. And it might also be that for some reason you have a question that you'd rather not ask in full public session with everybody listening in. So if that's the case, you can talk to us after this discussion. There'll be some time afterwards when we get together for a cup of tea, or you can submit a question in the forms that you'll find lying in your seat. And if you don't get your question in tonight, which will undoubtedly be the case for some of you, because we always have more questions at these events than we have time to answer them. So if you don't get your question answered tonight, stick it down on one of these bits of papers. There'll be places for you to put them later on, and you'll get a written answer in due course. And the point I'm really stressing here is that this is your opportunity to tell us what is important to you. So I hope you take the opportunity tonight. If any of the previous sessions are anything to go by, you will take this opportunity tonight, and I hope that you enjoy the experience. Again, from previous meetings, you'll ask, I'm sure, about a wide range of subjects. I'm not going to try and anticipate every single subject that you might ask about up front this evening, but I do want to say a few words, really just setting out, fairly briefly, the general approach that this government that you see assembled here is taking to try to make Scotland an even better place to live than I think we already are. Back in September, we published our programme for government, which is the document and the set of plans that the government publishes at the start of every parliamentary year. So it sets out our plan for the coming months, but also our vision for the country for the next 5 years and the next 10 years. And it describes how we will set about trying to create a fairer, more prosperous, more democratically engaged country. And I want to illustrate these three themes: fairness, prosperity and engagement, by referring to some of the events that I and my colleagues have been undertaking when we've been in the area today. Because the ability to go out and about and meet local individuals and local organisations is one of the big benefits for us in holding these cabinets outside of Edinburgh. We get to hear your views in the public meeting, but we also get to go and talk to organisations and individuals and businesses to hear a broad spectrum of opinion about life here and what they would like to see the government do to reflect their needs and priorities. So between us, all of us here today, we've undertaken about 20 different visits and meetings over the course of the day. For example, Fiona Hislop visited the Beacon Centre, Shona Robison met with young carers at the Youth Zone, Alec Neil announced a grant to help establish a new base for third centre organisations in the centre of Greenock. One of the visits I made, one which I think will be of enormous significance to the community here, was to the Greenock Cruise Liner terminal. It set out to me the plans it has for £14 million of investment as part of the city deal that's been agreed between the UK and the Scottish governments and the City of Glasgow and the other Clyde Valley local authorities. And that investment is intended to create additional cargo facilities and enable construction of a new visitor centre. And when you think about what the terminal at Greenock already brings to the economy, it attracts more than 100,000 visitors to this area, and obviously they go to other parts of Scotland as well, but 100,000 visitors every year. It's a really important element in the local economy. So this investment, which will expand the capacity of the terminal, is really important. By developing the infrastructure and the facilities the town needs to attract more freight, cargo and more visitors, it will help to create more jobs and more economic growth for the area. I also visited the James Watt Dock, where I was able to confirm that Greenock next June, when hopefully the weather will be better than it was when I visited today, will host the 2016 Powerboat Scottish Grand Prix of the Seas, which is a powerboat race effectively. It's an event that will attract visitors not just from Scotland and around the UK, but probably visitors globally as well to come here, and it will receive television coverage from around the world. I think they were saying today it will be viewed probably by 200 million people across the world. So, this part of Scotland showcased to the world. They're going to have jet ski races as well, and something you might want to mark in your diary is the Provost and I accepted a challenge to race each other on jet skis during the event next year. So we might start taking bets this evening on who's likely to emerge as the winner there. But that, although it's one sporting event, is very important symbolically as well as important in economic terms. Because one of the things we were determined to do when we hosted the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow last year was to show that Scotland's facilities, our organisational capacity and our public enthusiasm make Scotland a world-class venue for major sports events of all descriptions. And the Grand Prix is the latest demonstration that we're achieving that. And the aren't just confined to our big cities, but they will benefit towns and communities across Scotland as well. So these specific investments and projects are just some of the ways in which, as government, we're trying to support economic growth. One of the first steps we took as government way back in 2007 when we first took office was to create the most competitive business rate system anywhere in the UK. Here in Inverclyde, more than 1,000 business premises benefit from what we call our small business bonus, which is the scheme under which small businesses pay either reduced business rates or no business rates at all, trying to use our small businesses as the engine of economic growth. And our enterprise agencies, Scottish Enterprise in the case of this part of Scotland, help companies all over the country to innovate, to export and to expand. And Scottish Enterprise works directly with 12 companies based in Greenock. They support inward investment. The investment in Greenock that was announced last year by Sinex Concentrics, which is a provider of business services to international companies, is expected to create something like 500 new jobs. And beyond that direct support, we're pursuing a broader economic strategy which is based on promoting innovation, exports, skills and infrastructure. One of the really important things we're doing right now, which is important in every part of the country, but even more important in some of the rural parts of our country, is ensuring that at least 95% of all premises in Scotland are going to have access to superfast broadband by the end of next year. Because as we know, having good digital connections and good broadband access is fundamental to how we all live our lives these days. So the superfast broadband project started connecting people in Greenock in June, and it's a nationwide investment that will really enhance people's quality of life, but even more importantly, perhaps, it will boost our economic competitiveness, and it will make it much easier for people to live in, work in and do business in parts of Scotland outside our major urban conurbations. And all of these policies, all designed to stimulate our economy and support our economy to grow, are bringing results. In recent years, Scotland has become the most successful part of the UK outside of London for inward investment. The value of our exports has increased by a fifth, and our employment rate is higher than the UK average. There's a lot more to do, don't get me wrong. There's still a real fragility in parts of our economy, but we're on the right track, we think, through the policies or the kind of policies that I've been talking about. But as part of becoming more prosperous as an economy, we also want to make Scotland a fairer and more equal country to live in as well. There's really good evidence from right around the world that the kind of inequality we still witness in Scotland, even today in the 21st century, harms our economy. Last year, the OECD, which is a group of 34 developed nations across the world, they did a study on this, and it estimated that if you looked at the period from 1990 to 2010, the levels of inequality we have, not just in Scotland but in the UK, reduced our economic growth by as much as £1,600 for every person in the country. So that is a figure, hard evidence, I think, that demonstrates what I think most of us believe instinctively to be the case. We're all better off when everybody's got a fair chance to contribute their talent, their skills and their energy to our society. That's why our economic strategy prioritises fairness and competitiveness together. They're two sides of the same coin. So one of the visits Angela Constance made today was to Kings Oak Primary School. Education in Scotland, in my view, is a success story. School leaver destinations are the best on record, and recently young people in Scotland gained a record number of passes at higher and advanced higher. But we also know that notwithstanding these successes, across the country there's still too big a gap between the results that young people get if they live in the most deprived areas of our country and those that they get if they live in the least deprived areas of our country. And I've said that one of the big priorities of our government is to close that gap. That's why we're introducing a new national improvement framework for our schools. We need better and more consistent evidence of progress of whether what we're doing is working, while children are in primary school and early secondary school. We've also established a new attainment fund that we've put £100 million into for primary schools because we believe if we get benefits in primary schools when children are really young, then the effects last throughout secondary school and indeed throughout the entire lives of young people. And Inverclyde is one of the local authority areas that is benefiting from that £100 million attainment fund. It's appointing new teachers and family workers. Initially, they're going to focus on 6 primary schools, but it's a targeted approach and it's crucially decided. We don't pick the schools, local leaders pick the schools, and it's all intended and designed to improve children's literacy, their numeracy and their health and well-being. And Angela saw the work being done around this at King's Oak, which of course serves an area of high deprivation, and it's a school that's doing a really good job already. It's got superb teachers and leaders, but it's going to benefit significantly from these extra resources. So that's a good example of our focus, coupled with our investment in childcare or our support for the health service, all examples of our commitment to building a fairer Scotland. We're determined to ensure that even when we live in times of very, very tight public finances, and George Osborne on Wednesday will stand up in the House of Commons and give us his latest spending review, and I have to tell you, we're not expecting much good news out of it. But even when money is tight, and perhaps especially when money is tight, it's all the more important we focus on doing the things that really matter. So I've talked a bit about what we want to do, some of the steps we are taking to make Scotland a fairer and a more prosperous country. But I want to close by saying a little bit about how we want to do that. And this meeting here tonight is directly relevant to this next thing that I'm going to say. You know, if we think back to the referendum campaign last year, one of the great things about that campaign, in my view, wasn't the result, you might have noticed, but was the sense of engagement and participation that it inspired on both sides of the campaign. People discussed the future of the country. They talked about the sort of Scotland they wanted to see. You know, people were discussing these things in meetings like this, and at home, at work, on the street, in the pub, at the hairdressers. Every single part of the country was alive with that discussion. And one of the things I'm keen to achieve is that we harness that energy, that sense of engagement, and use it to tackle the day-to-day issues that affect people in Scotland. And we've taken some specific steps to do that. We've recently passed a Community Empowerment Act. Amongst other things, it requires public bodies, including the Scottish Government, to consider how they better engage with local people, to allow local people to drive the priorities of these public bodies more firmly. We've also introduced a land reform bill, helping communities ensure that land is managed for the well-being of the country, not just for the few, but for the many across Scotland. But in addition to these specific measures, we also are really keen to encourage participation throughout our entire approach to government. And that's exactly why we're holding events like this here in Greenock tonight, because we want to hear from you. Not because you'll then agree with every single decision we make, and not because we'll be able to do everything that you want us to do, but because we then can ensure that the views you express here to us tonight can feed into our decision making and make sure we make, or hopefully make sure we make better decisions that are much more in line with what you think the priorities are. So that is, in a nutshell, really, the purpose of tonight's event. And it is why I'm delighted to see so many of you here. And it's why I'm now, I think, looking forward to your questions. But one of the many privileges of becoming First Minister, of course, is that when I feel like it, I get to delegate all the difficult questions to these guys here. So thank you very much for listening, and let's get on with our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, First Minister. So we're now going to move into the formal question and answer session. And again, I don't know really anybody in the hall, so when it comes to the bit, put your hand up and I'll select you. There are a couple of folk who I do know in the hall. Provost mentioned Stuart McMillan, how Stuart had written to the Scottish Government, Stuart McMillan MSP, written to the Scottish Government suggesting we come to Inverclyde, and also your local MP, Ronnie Cowans, in the audience too. Now, just to be clear, I'm not going to select Stuart or Ronnie. This is your turn to challenge, to question the Scottish Government. I'm going to take questions in batches of 3 and then invite the First Minister and Cabinet to answer the questions. If people could raise your hand when the mic comes to you, say your name, and then be as brief in your question as possible. And I'm sure the Cabinet will do likewise. That way we'll get through as many questions as possible. So let's make a start. You raise your hands if you want to ask a question. Okay. So the gentleman there. So mic 1 to the gentleman with the blue top. Yeah. The audio people are upstairs, so I'm having to do it one at a time in this particular order. Yeah.
Thanks very much. You said you'd do them in batches of 3, and I happen to have 3. I'll keep them quick.
Just very quickly.
The first one is it sounds like there's going to be a vote in the Commons around action to be taken in Syria. First Minister, you had said, I believe, the case hasn't been made for action, whether that's action David Cameron's planning. And that's obviously your view at the moment. I believe the case has been made for action. As well as saying you don't think it's the case or maybe disagree with what David Cameron wants, what do you think we should do? So that's my first question.
What's your name, sorry?
Jamie Black.
Jamie. Just one more, because it's not fair on other people.
Okay.
So.
The second one is, First Minister, the Transport Minister is not here tonight, unfortunately. You were key in securing a tremendous passenger service in the Greenock to Dunoon service. It's a twice-hourly passenger service which supports the communities in Greenock and Dunoon. Unfortunately, the other service which runs from Greenock, the Kilcreggan ferry, despite numerous representations from myself and the Carbo Bay and Greenock West Community Council, has not been so fortunate in having that attention and is at risk, I believe, of being discontinued despite it being a lifeline to those communities. Would you be able to tell me why that's not had the focus that Greenock Dunoon's had? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And the lady in the middle there. Yep.
Welcome to all of you, and
Could you say what your name is? Sorry.
Pardon?
Your name?
Yes, my name's Maggie McLean. It's because we're so proud of everything that you do that I think this next thing is something that's very much on my mind. The whole range of social media is just awash with advice about what we do with our second vote in 16. Now, I'm surely pretty certain that it's got to be, SNP 1 and 2. But how do we counter all the advice about all the twists and turns of, the numerical nonsense? We've got to make sure that we have the right answer and that we can gainsay the people who tell us otherwise.
Okay, one more question. So the gentleman,
Tom Tracy, given that there is no evidence that standardised testing has ever improved attainment, why is the Scottish Government planning to introduce them in the face of wholesale opposition?
Thank you. So 4 questions.
Okay, can I start with Syria? The Transport Minister is not here, but Keith is the Infrastructure Secretary who's overall responsible for transport and other infrastructure matters. So I'll ask him to answer on Kilcreggan. I'll ask Angela to take the question on standardised assessment, and then I'll take your question, Maggie, on how people should vote, where my answer, I'm sure, will surprise everybody in this room. Can I start with Syria, though, because you've raised, obviously, one of the most important questions of our time right now. And I think the case for action against Islamic State, Daesh, whatever we want to call them, absolutely has been made. I think the question is what that action should be. Now, I said last week, and I absolutely meant it, that we will listen to the Prime Minister's case for airstrikes by the UK in Syria. The House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee recently published a report raising a number of questions that they thought had to be answered. And that committee actually had a Conservative majority, which proves these things are not always party political. The Prime Minister is going to answer that report, I think, on Thursday, setting out what he thinks the case for airstrikes is. Now, while I think, and I'll come on to what I think some of the actions should be, at this stage, although I am and we are listening, I don't think the case for airstrikes has been made for a number of reasons. You know, there are already airstrikes on Syria. You know, there's no shortage of people bombing Syria right now. The United States are doing it, France is doing it, Russia is doing it, Turkey is doing it, a range of different countries are doing it. And I think one of the questions that has to be answered is, you know, whatever the UK was to add to that would be fairly limited. The UK, I don't think, is proposing to increase its air force presence in the area. It's already undertaking airstrikes on Iraq. So what does the addition of very limited additional strikes add to that? Because the airstrikes that are currently happening are not, or so it would appear, stopping Islamic State doing what they're doing. The second point is, you know, you can bomb people from a great height, but what then happens on the ground? When you bomb IS, who then moves in to take control of the territory that hopefully you're pushing them out of? And one of the real complications in Syria right now is that it is a multi-layered, multi-party civil war. So there is the Assad regime with various opposition forces to it, and then there's Islamic State, and different countries are bombing different players there. So Russia's bombing the non-Islamic State opposition to Assad, and others are bombing others. And the question is, you can bomb IS, but what then happens on the ground to make sure that they don't just regroup and that there's not just more chaos that then feeds further the kind of extremist ideology that is fueling what they are doing. So these are some of the questions. There's also a legal question about the legal authority for airstrikes. So I think these are some of the questions that have to be answered if we're to, I think, come to a view that airstrikes, rather than just being a kind of desire to do something, are actually the right thing to do, and that they're going to help solve the problem rather than perhaps make the problem even worse. Now, what should be done? I think the peace process that is underway, and I'm not being naive about this, but what that's trying to do is take all of the players in Syria that are not Islamic State and try to get them to stop fighting each other and try to combine so that there can be a combined effort against the terrorists in Islamic State. I think much more needs to be done to cut off the funding and the supplies and the weapons that are going to them. You know, somebody is buying their oil. You know, people are getting money to them. They're being supplied with weapons. So I think there has to be more support for the peace process to try and combine the forces against them, and a much more rigorous attempt to cut off some of their supplies. So I don't want to go on for too much longer, but I would absolutely agree with you that we can't sit back and do nothing. You know, we saw what happened in Paris, and you know, my scepticism about airstrikes is not because I don't think we have to have action against them. I think it's important, though, that it's the right action, and we don't just go on feeding a cycle of violence in the Middle East that just sees things get worse and worse and worse and worse. But we'll continue to listen to the case that is made over the course of this week. We don't yet know whether there will be an actual vote in the House of Commons next week. I don't think the government has finally decided that, but obviously the SNP in the House of Commons, if there is a vote, will have to take a considered view of what its position is, and it will be a careful, considered view that we take based on some of the issues that I've been talking about. Keith, do you want to deal with the Kilcreggan ferry next?
Sure. You mentioned, Jamie, I think it is, that the work that's been put in by the First Minister in relation to the Greenock service, and why not in Kilcreggan? Well, the simple reason is that we don't run the Kilcreggan service. That's run by Strathclyde Passenger Transport. And it's not to say that we would pass the buck or not be concerned about a lack of service. So what we've done in response to some representations that we've had is we've made the offer not just to SPT, but also to Argyll and Bute, Orkney and Shetland, who also run their own services. If there are any services they'd like us to take over, then we're more than willing to discuss that. And I've written to, some time ago now actually, SPT on that issue, and they are not for us taking over that service. That is their democratic right. I mean, the way that SPT is formed, they're formed by statute. Every council, including the local council here, has representation on SPT. And that, I think, has to be the route by which you seek the improvements. We remain willing to talk to SPT about any requests that they might have for us to take over a service. And there are advantages in that, because we are bundling together quite a lot of services, and it may be there are economies of scale that we could help in relation to that. But we're not in the business of just taking these services from democratically accountable bodies, so we'd have to have their consent to do that. I understand what you said about the services. Derek Mackay is also aware of that, but as it stands just now, it is the responsibility of SPT, and I don't want to pass the buck. I'd really like to be able to help, but we cannot impose on democratically elected bodies who then nominate representatives to another body, in this case SPT, that we simply want to take over that service at this stage.
Okay, Angela, to go to Tom's point about standardised assessment.
Yes, thank you for that question, Tom. Over the past few months, I've been in different parts of Scotland with different stakeholders, whether it's parents groups, teachers, academics, and we've been debating and discussing the National Improvement Framework, which was introduced by the First Minister as a draft. It was published on the 1st of September. And in that National Improvement Framework, it sets out 6 very important drivers based on evidence. So we know things like the importance of leadership, we know about the importance of parental engagement, leadership in school and school improvement. And we know that these things are all imperative to driving attainment and to reducing the attainment gap. And as one part of one of those drivers for improvement, there's a section on assessing children's progress. And part of that, there is a section that deals with standardised assessment. And first and foremost, I'm only interested in what works in terms of improving the educational outcomes of children. And it's important to remember that 30 out of 32 local authorities already use some form of standardised assessment, usually for things around literacy and numeracy. So there's a real opportunity here to cut out some bureaucracy, have a method of standardised assessment, which is just for, some quite bespoke parts of our curriculum that is actually suited to our curriculum, because just now local authorities buy in standardised assessments models quite often from other providers that are not bespoke to our curriculum. So there's a good opportunity here to have a standardised assessment tool that is bespoke and meets the need of our curriculum here in Scotland. And in terms of the evidence, well, there's various evidence. There's the Accounts Commission in Scotland last year published a very interesting report, and it pointed out that the local authorities who were doing best to improve attainment despite the challenges of deprivation were the local authorities that valued and invested in leadership and the professionalism of teachers, but they also had a sensible and proportionate use of data. And I'm not interested in gathering information for information's sake. We have to use information that supports the needs of children, crucially, but also supports teachers to do their job, so that it informs what we actually do in the classroom. But also it's important to have more information than is currently available to inform what we do both at a local and national level, so that we are directing our resources and our efforts firstly and foremostly on what works and on what works for children. So we're still in the process of consulting. The National Improvement Framework will be published in January, and that will reflect the many comments and the considered debate that we've had with many stakeholders over the past few months.
Okay, and Maggie, I'm going to be quite brief in answering your question, because this is not a party political meeting, and there'll be people here of all voting preferences tonight. So, some people will be SNP supporters, some people won't be, and that's fine. That's not what we're here for tonight. But when it comes to the election, it won't surprise you to know that I'll be asking people and encouraging people to vote SNP with both votes. We have a proportional representation system for the Scottish Parliament, and in short, your constituency vote is to elect your local constituency member of the Scottish Parliament. Your regional vote is effectively what balances it all out proportionately, and effectively, therefore, your regional vote determines who's in government and who your First Minister is. So if you want this lot here to stay in government, and if you want me to stay as First Minister, it's really important that you vote SNP with your first and your second vote. To do anything else kind of puts it all out to chance. And if you want a particular government, it's probably important not to do that. So that will be the message that's not really for tonight, but I'll take that message to the country in a few months' time.
Okay, give your hands again. Okay, the gentleman there.
Yeah. My name's Chris Orr. The government's pledged to introduce 1,140 childcare hours to 3 and 4-year-olds. I'm just wondering what the plans are for how you're going to facilitate that with workforce and possible establishments.
Okay, and then the lady there. Yeah, black here.
Hello, my name is Susanna Knox. I'm here representing Inverclyde Childminding Network, strangely enough, linked to the question for the gentleman there. We have worked really hard in the last 2 years to raise the profile of childminding. We were delighted to see the First Minister acknowledging how important childminding is because it offers flexibility for parents. Childminders not only support the children in their care, but the families that they work with. But we are very concerned because obviously we understand that you understand how important childminding is. And we're looking forward not only just now for the 600 hours, but eventually to 2020 to the 1,120 hours. And we're wondering how childminders will feature in that, because what we're finding is there is a break from what the government wants to happen and what is happening at a grassroots level. When we're speaking, we're meeting barrier after barrier after barrier. Childminders are funding their own training. There is no money being provided to childminders to train. You talked, First Minister, about how important it is for primary schools and secondary schools and how important the children are to the future of this country. But that starts before primary care. That starts in early years care. And childminders are a major important part of that. And I feel personally, and I know that certainly in our network, we feel that has not been acknowledged and we are not being given a voice. And if we are given a voice, we will say to you that we are ready and waiting, but we need help and support.
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman there is going to lose circulation in his hand if I don't take his question.
This is a hot potato. Last Friday, I was up at Glasgow Central Mosque. I went there with two intentions. One was to read out the letter of the widower, which I think most of you have read, about his wife being killed in the bombing. And secondly, was to find out if there was any response from the mosque itself. Now, they had what do you call it, a press conference outside, and they made their apologies and said it was outrageous. I happened to go inside to hear what was being said to the believers, right, the Muslim believers. And I waited, and I thought I was going to be allowed to say my piece. But unfortunately I wasn't. But after the service, I spoke to the clerk and I asked him, am I right in saying there was no mention of Paris by the imam? And he bowed his head and he says, yes, you're right. But we did say outside at the press conference, I said, well, I feel that is a gross omission. And here's my point, Nicola. I would like to see a working party to look into the Quran and the mosques, because this is a rich Christian heritage. And I feel there's a disconnection in the mosque between the older ones and the younger ones. Because let's face it, what happened in Paris was young people from the age of 20 up to 25. They're not going to the mosque. And my point is, when I was in the mosque, the imam was from Pakistan. As I looked in the mosque, there wasn't one shred as if to think you were in the West if you were in Glasgow. You could as well have been in Pakistan. So I've got a concern there, and I would like us to unpack what's going on with the Quran, why it makes people toxic. Second point is, excuse me, to do with ships. Second point is to do with ships. I would love to see a continental ferry going from Greenock to France. I think it's high time we had a link between Scotland and the continent with a continental ferry. Thank you.
Okay.
Two different posts.
Right, I'm going to ask Angela to respond to the point that Chris raised and the connected point. So I didn't catch your name, Susanna. Can I just say, first of all, though, on this, because this is an issue really close to our hearts, the expansion of childcare. What we set out to do is transform childcare over the next 5 years, double provision. I've described it as the biggest infrastructure project that we'll undertake over the next Parliament. It will take a lot of money. It's going to cost us about £800 million. It will require probably about 20,000 additional staff in the childcare sector, and it will require us to expand current facilities, either sort of refurbish some existing facilities or build new facilities. So it's a big project, but it's absolutely crucial. And childminders, and this is what I was saying last week, are critical to that. Not everybody will want their child, particularly the 2-year-olds that qualify for the free places, to be in a nursery all day. So childminders are going to be a crucial part of that. And what I was announcing last week was the induction and training that we're going to now make available to all childminders. Many childminders do it already, but by making it available, we recognise the importance of childminders, and we really want you to be part of that. So I'm going to ask Angela just to add to that, and then I'll come on to your question about the mosques, and I'll ask Keith to deal with your question about a continental ferry.
Our plans to expand childcare are fundamentally important for a number of reasons, but the principal 2 reasons are, first and foremost, it's good for children, it's good for their educational and for their overall development to have opportunities to participate in high quality childcare that supports their learning, and that's why we talk about early learning and childcare, because it's not just learning and it's not just childcare, it is both things wrapped up together. It's also important in terms of our economy, in terms of supporting more women back into work. And what we will have to do over the next 5 years, we've done it in part over the preceding 5 years, where we've increased the proportion of hours from 475 hours to 600 hours. That's a 45% increase that we've had since 2006-07, and we now want to double that again. So we've learned a lot from our initial expansion, but the crucial challenge for us going forward is that there are 3 things that we have to do, and we have to do these 3 things in tandem. We have to increase the quantity of the hours without compromising quality, and we have to find better ways to provide flexibility for children and their families. And the lady from the Childminder organisation certainly touched on that, because different families have different needs, different children have different needs. And through the Children and Young Persons Act, we were able for the first time to put an obligation on local authorities to consult with their local population about how to improve the delivery of childcare at a local level and how to improve the flexibility. So there are 3 things that we want to do in tandem. Increase the hours, absolutely must maintain quality and improve flexibility for parents. And of course, childminders and other providers are a very important part of that. So just now, local authorities provide nurseries, there's private nurseries, there's childminders, there are other providers as well, and we will need to tap in to the talents and all the resources. And as the First Minister says, it's costed out, we know how much it's going to cost, and we know that we'll need 20,000 additional people in the workforce. And the training for people to get into the childcare workforce is absolutely pivotal as well. And the First Minister announced a few months back that for areas of deprivation, there will be an additional graduate professional also working with those nurseries, because getting it right in the early years is absolutely crucial if we're going to close the attainment gap.
Okay, thanks, Angela. So, to move on to your question about the mosque, let me say a couple of things about this. Firstly, we live in a diverse, multicultural, multi-faith society, and I actually think that's one of our strengths, not one of our weaknesses. I think it's a great thing that we've got people in Scotland who worship all faiths and no faiths. And the second thing I want to say, and I should say I represent the south side of Glasgow in the Scottish Parliament, which has the biggest Muslim population in the country resident within its boundaries. The Muslim community here are not responsible for what happened in Paris last week. The people who carried out those terrorist attacks, they claim to be Muslims, but frankly, they are a perversion of Islam and all it stands for. Terrorists know no religion. They hijack religions in order to try to justify the evil acts that they carry out. And I, again, because of the people I represent, I've seen so often in the wake of these terrorist attacks, and I can't speak for what happened in the mosque on Friday, but I do know after almost every terrorist attack I can remember, there is a message goes to all of the imams to say they should use their sermon on a Friday to say that these things are not, Muslim, they are an insult to and a perversion of Islam. So I don't know whether or not that happened in the Central Mosque on Friday. But I've seen firsthand the impact on our Muslim community these terrorist attacks have, because they feel all the same things we feel. They feel the revulsion and the horror and the fear and the anxiety. But they've also got the added impact of they know that people are pointing the finger of blame at them. And it is an appalling thing to watch. So I think, as well as standing shoulder to shoulder with France, we should stand shoulder to shoulder with each other here, because the terrorists want us to start blaming each other and pointing the finger at each other. And the biggest rebuke to them is to refuse to do that. But the last thing I would say, which is kind of picking up on the one thing you said that I sort of agreed with, we can't be complacent. These terrorists, sort of find ways of influencing people. So particularly with a younger population, of course we've got to be on our guard. And, nobody, in my experience, is more acutely aware of that, not just in Scotland, but I'm sure in other parts of the UK than the elders in the mosques in our Muslim community. But we also have, and I'm going to, if you can be very brief here, Michael, I'm going to ask Michael, the Justice Secretary, to say a word about the body of work we do, which is known as Prevent, which works with different communities to try to counter extremism and make sure that we're combating any kind of move on the part of anybody towards that kind of extremist ideology that sometimes manifests itself in the kind of acts we saw. So, Michael, do you want to just say a word about Prevent before we move on?
So, as the First Minister mentioned, an important part of the work we do around our counter-terrorism and counter-extremism work is to prevent individuals from actually engaging in extremism behaviour in the first place. And a key part to that is very close community engagement. And the lead for that in Scotland is Police Scotland, who do a tremendous amount of work across our communities in Scotland in engaging within local community groups and engaging with a whole range of different stakeholders, so that where they identify someone where they are concerned about their behaviour or the views at which they are expressing, is that they're engaged at an early stage in order to start to alter and change that behaviour to reduce the risk of that. And one of the things I can say to you, sir, very, very clearly, is a level of engagement that Police Scotland and other agencies have with the Muslim community and others within Scotland is absolutely first class in wanting to make sure that the focus here is on community cohesion and community engagement and not looking to try and scapegoat any part of our community. That type of approach to preventing these types of things from happening in the first place is absolutely key. And we do that very well in Scotland, and Police Scotland are engaging very closely with community groups to make sure that we continue that type of prevent work.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And I am going to lead by example and trying to be briefer in our answers so we get more questions in. But Keith, on the question of a continental Greenock to France ferry, what have you got to say?
Well, Scottish Government's always open to any ideas like that. There is, of course, currently a continental service from Rosyth to Zeebrugge, which is a freight-only service. It was a passenger service. Passengers weren't there, it's become a freight service. We're not directly able to fund that, not the entirety of it, so it would require somebody to come forward and say they wanted to do it. We can't fund it because, well, we're not allowed to under European legislation. There are certain things we can do. For example, European waterborne freight grant, we can put money in that way. So if somebody wants to come forward, then we're more than willing to listen to that. And what was being said earlier on by the First Minister about continental cruises, if that leads to more people becoming aware of Greenock as a destination, then of course that can be looked at. But just to say, the ferry services that we are responsible for, the Carmack ones, that's where we've invested our money. So you've seen fares come down hugely since 2007. You've seen increases in wages above inflation for the people that work there. You've seen more routes put on and you've seen more investment in vessels. That's where we're investing our money in ferries.
We'll move swiftly on at that point.
Okay, right at the front here. No, further this way. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, the one you're at, get the lady here. No, just behind you, yeah.
Just me.
Yeah.
Hiya, my name's Amy Shearer, and it's just commenting on what you said about equality and stuff. So being a young person who lives in this area, for the last 4 years or so, I've been doing a lot of volunteering with kids with disabilities. So it's just to kind of comment on inequality. I feel like there's still a lot of stigma going on between kids in mainstream schools and kids in additional support needs schools. And obviously through personal experience, I've kind of noticed that there's no need for that to be the case anymore, because building up friendships with these children, I've actually definitely made best friends for life, really. So it's just to see, is there anything we, both yourselves and ourselves, can do, especially since I'm obviously still of school age, to kind of break down these barriers. I just feel if we're going to build a stronger Scotland and build a better future, I really feel we need to involve these children now before it gets too late. So thank you.
Okay, right in the middle there. Yeah, the guy here, no, back. Sorry, yeah, thanks.
My name's Billy McShane. I've been a police officer for 16 years, 14 years here now working at Glasgow Airport. We're going up to a new change with Mr House now leaving. The police, as you've seen by obviously the report we had with regard to the way our job satisfaction is and stuff now has went rock bottom. It was mentioned to yourself also with regard to pensions, all sorts of things. The job basically turning into Tesco's, KPIs. Why have the police got KPIs? It seems kind of strange to me. With morale low, it's going to affect other things. Obviously, the things that happened in Paris, you're always on your guard. We've not got the armed officers that France do. As we're talking about building up partnerships, obviously keeping people together, important building with the Muslim community, all that sort of thing. But my driving force is, with the new Chief Constable coming in, are we going to have he or she focused on the staff as well as what you're looking for? Because if we're not happy, we're not going to give the best service.
Okay, and right, second row from the front, two in. Yeah.
Okay, Donna Pickett. The young lady over there spoke about supporting kids with disabilities and the barriers that they have. My brother-in-law is actually Down syndrome. He lives with his elderly mother. We're actually coming up against a wall of what are we going to do now in the future with both of these and trying to have them live together, because they've lived together all their lives. One of the problems we come up with when we didn't know he couldn't vote. It was only up until recently did we actually ask through our MP and MSP that he could actually vote. There's a lot of misinformation out there that people with disabilities have. Is there something we could do to look at that? Because, I mean, sure, you can start with the children, but what about the people who are already in our communities? So we were told by a lawyer that he wasn't allowed to have decisions in the community. He doesn't hold a bank account. Because this is what he was led to believe. So that inability for them to input into the community, I think, is holding them back. And if we only found out that information, how many more others are out there that don't know this sort of stuff? Can we look at that, something, education better? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Alec Neil, who is the Cabinet Secretary with responsibility for Equalities, to answer. I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry. Amy. Amy's question, and also to take on Donna's question, and then Michael Matheson will answer your question, Billy.
Can I just say a key part of this government is about social justice, and social justice and equality go together, that we're all equal. As they used to say in Scotland, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, and it shouldn't matter whether you're disabled or not disabled. It shouldn't matter what your gender is according to what you get paid. Women should get paid the same as men for doing the same job as men. Race shouldn't matter. Sexual orientation shouldn't matter. We want an equal Scotland. So discrimination in all its forms is something we want to get rid of. I didn't know that people with Down syndrome weren't allowed to vote, but it's something that we will take up, because I don't think that's right, that is the case. And if I can just say, in terms of disabled people generally, one of the problems we have is that the level of employment of disabled people is half of what it is in the general population, and particularly with people with learning difficulties, they're half again. They give a 25% of the chance of employment of anyone who doesn't have a disability. That is something we're tackling and trying to make sure that we bring disabled people up to the same level as everybody else with the same chances in life. And similarly, I absolutely agree with Amy. You start with the children, people who have prejudices, Scotland is full of prejudices in many respects, but people who are prejudicial against other people because of their religion or their race or their colour or any of the other things I've mentioned, we've got to stamp out that kind of prejudice and discrimination, because that's not the kind of society we have. And we are actually, between Michael's budget and mine, we are spending £40 million, 20 million a year in my budget, and a lot of money in Michael's budget, and Nicola boosted that by 20 million over the current 3-year period to try to stamp out discrimination and inequality in all its formats. And the final point I would make is the biggest inequality in our society, affecting every group, are the levels of poverty and deprivation that we have. And that is our number one objective, is to tackle poverty and deprivation and make Scotland a much, much fairer society for everybody.
Billy, I'm going to ask Michael to take on your question. Before I do that, our police service is nothing without the staff who work in it. And we've got challenges that were evident in the staff survey, which Michael will talk about how we and the Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority are going to deal with. But let me just take this opportunity publicly to thank you and your colleagues for what you do to keep us safe, because we depend on you.
Billy, just picking up on a few of the points that you've raised, one thing that the people of Scotland can be assured of is that we actually have a first-class police service in Scotland through Police Scotland, and going to a single national force has actually allowed us to deliver a level of capability across Scotland through operational skills and knowledge and equipment in a way that was just not there previously with the 7 legacy forces, or the 8 legacy forces, and the real difference that that's made to how we can deliver policing. You mentioned, for example, the issues around pensions. We opposed the pension changes which the UK government were introducing to police pensions, and we were very limited in anything we could do about that. But we decided to take a very different course of action when it came to the Windsor report, where Windsor around terms and conditions, as you'll be aware, were not altered in Scotland in the same way, in order to recognise the very specific and specialist role that police officers undertake and the terms and conditions which are associated with that. And the staff survey has highlighted things like pensions, and some of the changes that we've had in going to a single force have had a significant impact on the morale of police officers. And what the new chair of the Scottish Police Authority has been very clear about is that the incoming Chief Constable will have a clear responsibility in addressing the issues that have been highlighted by staff in the staff survey. And what's probably more important, well, what is more important than the first staff survey is the second staff survey, because that will demonstrate whether progress has been made in addressing the issues that officers have raised in the course of the first survey, to make sure that the changes that they're looking to see happening start to get implemented, and that will obviously be a key focus for the incoming Chief Constable. Another thing I want to pick up on is the point that you made about the issue of armed officers off the back of Paris. As you'll appreciate, there is a significant amount of work being undertaken just now by Police Scotland in reviewing the present arrangements which we have, and to consider what additional capacity we might have to put in place as well in order to make sure that we have the right type of protection and services in place. And that work's been undertaken just now, and we as a government will support Police Scotland in what additional support they require in order to make sure that we have the necessary capacity. But you can be assured that with the incoming Chief Constable, it's an opportunity to address some of these issues that have been highlighted in the staff survey, and to make sure that both you and your colleagues feel that you're being treated in the way that is appropriate, and that it reflects the values and the aspirations of the people of Scotland and how the service has been delivered within local communities.
Okay, we've got some hands towards the back of the hall. We'll be missing there. So there's somebody just right at the back at the middle there. I think it's the second mic.
Yep. Ewan McLean. Can I ask the First Minister, will she and her Parliament support Anne McTaggart's organ donation bill, which is currently making its way through the Scottish Parliament? And if for any reason that bill fails, what measures will her Parliament take to improve the organ donation rate in Scotland?
Okay, and then the lady just right at the very back.
Okay, with regards to your Scottish police force, when will this government realise that it's not working? No one is happy with it, not only just the officers, and I am a retired officer, but also the normal people in the street. We in Inverclyde especially are we're losing a lot of police officers. They are getting elsewhere, and before, when it was the 8 different forces, we still had the Scottish Crime Squad, we had the Serious Crime Squad, so it's nothing new to have a Scotland, but to have one police force and also one fire service is not working, and I'm quite sure if you were to speak to the majority of people, they'll agree that they really want back to local policing.
Okay, and is there one more question over to the right at the back there? Yeah, sorry, the gentleman in blue, sort of in the middle. 4 in, yep, you.
Thank you. Jerry Maguire. Another question on testing. We've been assured that the standardised testing will be different this time. What plans are there to ensure that the abuses that were prevalent the last time, where school was pitted against school, authority against authority, and it ended up where it was completely meaningless testing that was done for its own sake and didn't really advance attainment one iota?
Okay, that was right. Shona, Health Secretary, will take the question on organ donation. Diana, I'll ask Michael to answer your question, although he's obviously just given a lot of the information I'm sure that he'll give there. And Jerry, Angela, again, without repeating stuff she said earlier on, will take on the question about standardised assessment. So Shona, do you want to kick off?
Well, the organ donation bill at the moment going through Parliament is a backbench bill that's been brought by Anne McTaggart, MSP, and we have a lot of sympathy with the aims of the bill, but you've got to imagine how complex the whole legislation is around organ donation, and how important it is we get it right. So the system at the moment has seen some improvements over the years in terms of the number of organs that have been donated, but there is, it's fair to say, a lot of public support to move to a soft opt-out system, which would mean a change to the system, which would presume that with all the safeguards in place that people had given their consent for organ donation unless otherwise stated, albeit with safeguards of families still having a say. Now, the Welsh Government has moved down that road, and what we have said as a government is that we want to see how the Welsh system works, and we want to then take that evidence and look, if it's positive, towards bringing forward a bill to the Parliament in the next parliamentary term, because there are some problems with the current bill going through Parliament. Some of the experts have said that actually it creates bureaucracy and it creates barriers and potential barriers to people giving organs and organs being donated, so it could actually put in place some extra difficulties. Now, we have to listen to that expert advice, but that doesn't mean that we can't move forward with the principle of changing the organ donation system in due course, but we have to do it properly, and the legislation has to be right. So what we want to do is look how Wales goes, and if it goes well, then we would want to consult on bringing forward legislation in the new parliamentary session, and legislation that is widely consulted upon, and we'll make sure that we get it absolutely right.
Okay, thanks, Shona. And Michael, do you want to take on Diane's question? Trying not to repeat your last answer.
Sure. One of the things that we had with 8 legacy forces previously is that we had one police force that covered half of the country's population, and then we had 7 other police forces that covered the rest of the country's population. We had 8 chief constables with 8 executive teams. We had 18 different computer systems doing different things that were all meant to be similar. Systems that didn't talk to one another between the different police forces because they didn't have compatible computer systems. We had a whole range of different challenges within the 8 different legacy forces which we had. If you look at most other areas within Western Europe which are similar to the size of Scotland, they have a single police force in order to deliver services within local areas. Now, in saying that, I accept that a major reform like policing in Scotland has had some of the challenges that go with that level of reform, and there are further improvements that can be made in making sure that these are effectively addressed. So earlier on today, I met with the local area commander and his neighbourhood officers team, who are telling me about the different work that they're doing within the local neighbourhood, working in partnership with local community councils, how they want to strengthen that to make sure there's much more consistency around the officers that are working within local neighbourhoods, to make sure that they can build up a rapport with the local community much more effectively. Police Scotland overall is operating exceptionally well and is delivering a very good quality of service. There are areas for improvement, and there's work being taken forward in order to address that. And from what I heard from the local commander today, he's very committed to making sure that that community engagement and that local policing level is reflective of what the local community are looking for.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And Angela, do you want to take on, perhaps particularly around Jerry's point about what we're doing to avoid teaching to the test and league tables, which are often the concerns that people have about standardised assessment?
Absolutely. I mean, a hallmark of Scotland's education system is collaboration, not competition. And I will stress that we are not turning the clock back to high-stakes national testing that is based on single or very discrete bits of information. We, over the past 10 years, have implemented Curriculum for Excellence, which is broad, and any assessment that supports Curriculum for Excellence has to be holistic. And, you know, standardised assessment is currently taking place. It will have to be different because our curriculum is now very different than what it was a number of years ago under the 5 to 14 curriculum. And crucially, any standardised assessment has to inform teacher judgment and most certainly does not replace teacher judgment. And we have no desire to see a return to crude league tables. And that's why we have always said, even when the National Improvement Framework was first published in its draft form, that we would be given very, very careful consideration to what is published and how it is published, because it is very clear that that need for information that I spoke about earlier, that need is very different within the context of a classroom than it is in the context of a government. It is imperative that local and national government know that their policies and their approaches and their use of resources is achieving the right outcomes. But that's quite different from the information that a classroom teacher will need to inform what needs to be done differently with an individual pupil. So we want to have that line of sight between the classroom and local and national policy. But we're acutely aware that information that is gathered for performance purposes is very different to that information that is gathered for diagnostic purposes in terms of supporting a child's learning.
Okay, thanks, Angela.
Right at the very front here with the first mic. Here. Thanks.
Just a wee word on maternity services, how they're restricted down the west coast, some of the west coast of Scotland, where our local hospital, most of the maternity services are done away with, and there came a situation, a family member took to Paisley yesterday. She was under 28 weeks pregnant, so she was, and they couldn't facilitate her in Paisley, and they had to phone round to hospitals in Glasgow, East Coast, and as far as down the Ayr, and if they couldn't get her a bed in Scotland, they should have to get moved to England. So how would it go about maternity services, how to get better facilities?
Okay, thank you. Could you pass that microphone just back? That's perfect, thanks.
Hi, I'm Martin Black. I'm currently 23 years old, and I'm here representing my autism reach group along with myself. I think just before I ask my just before I ask my question, I think I should point out just quickly. People in my family were saying to me, "Oh, Martin, when you're going tonight, ask them this, ask them that." I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be their puppet. I'm not sending a message or that. I'm here asking a question that's really relevant to me, very, very important to me actually. So, thanks. What are your concerns or your thoughts on encouraging people or giving them the right kind of support, people that are on the autistic spectrum or have Asperger's syndrome, and finding jobs? Because I mean, they are capable of doing stuff, you know. It's just they need the right kind of encouragement and support in a way, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the lady with blonde hair, no. Yeah, lady with blonde hair, yeah, thank you.
Hello, hi. Hello? Oh yeah. I'm Kirsty Park. I'm a staff nurse at neonatal intensive care. So the lady there, we were full last night. That's why you probably went to England. I've got two questions. One is about, I'm a nurse. My pension, I was able to retire at the age of 55, 60. I've now, because of I've missed it by 2 months, I've now been told that I've got to work till I'm 67. I'm a neonatal intensive care nurse, which we run to crash calls. We deal with babies that are 24 weeks, 26 weeks, very, very, very ill patients, babies, who need a lot of care, a lot of intensive care. We are overworked. There's not enough. We've just moved to, I refuse to call me whatever, I'm a Republican. I will not call it. I work at the Southern General. I do not. And every day I get about 10, I'll show you, it says the Queen Elizabeth. I refuse. I work at the Southern. I live in Greenock and I work at the Southern, and I can assure you, even some of the no voters are not too happy about the naming of my hospital. But the one thing that all our nurses are, we are absolutely overworked at the moment. I've done 3 extra shifts and it's not even the end of the month. So that's why you haven't seen me in the SNP, because I've been working our hearts off at the Southern General, which is the biggest in the whole of whatever. So we have people from England, so people go from England, we've even had people from France. We have patients from everywhere. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to do something about this pension. There was a fellow police officer there, talks about the pension. We are giving, I can assure you, as nurses, we are giving our utmost. But I think you guys are asking too much for us when you expect us to work to 67. Do you want me to have a Zimmer frame and have the wee baby in the Zimmer frame part of it? That's the way I feel. The fact is, we cannot, at 67, run to crash calls. I was in intensive care yesterday and looking after really babies that one was fitting, had 25 fits. We have to work very fast, and you've got to do something about this pension. And the second question I've got is, I've been a nationalist all my life, and I'm worried that the Scottish Government, the SNP, I'm worried, I'm an old SNP where my main aim is independence. I don't care what you do, I want independence no matter what. No matter what. I don't care if it makes me poorer for 10 years, I want independence. And there's a lot of people that have come into this party that have just I don't want it to become Labour, where Labour betrayed the people. Please promise me that the SNP
I promise you that the
will
SNP
never betray us. Never.
Will never become Labour.
Never.
There you go. You heard it here first. I think I get the gist, okay?
Okay,
Right.
I counted 3 questions though.
There was about 1 million questions in there, and we have to try and disaggregate them all. Firstly, just like I said to the police officer, to you and all your nurse colleagues, we owe you such an enormous debt of gratitude for what you do, so thank you. And perhaps not for exactly the same reasons as you, but I think I'll probably always call it the Southern General as well. I'm going to ask Shona to take on the point about maternity services. I'm going to ask Rosanna, the Employment Secretary, to take on your point, Martin, about helping people on the autistic spectrum into work. Then John will take on the point about pensions. In summary, the answer to that question is, it isn't us that's doing it to you. But John will expand a bit more, okay? We're on your side. And then I might end with a word or two about independence, but only a word or two. Okay.
Okay, well, a big thank you from me as well to you and all your colleagues. Can we just call it the new hospital? Or maybe get away. But a big thank you. And obviously the pension changes, are the UK government's pension changes, but have big repercussions. What we would expect the NHS and indeed other public services to do is to make sure that there's the support there for people who are reaching retirement age in terms of the duties that they are expected to carry out. And we're certainly expecting boards to be sensible about that and to make sure that we use the skills and experience, but also to recognise that with an ageing workforce, you have to think about the skill mix there. In terms of the wider point about maternity services, obviously we have a mix of midwife-led services and consultant-led services, and it depends on the level of risk. And I will certainly look into the case of was it your sister? And we need to make sure that the risk assessment there is right in terms of what services should access. We do have a review of maternity and neonatal services underway, being led by both the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Nursing Officer, because we want to get the right beds in the right places, and we'd want to hear perhaps your sister's experience there. Sometimes it is busy, and unfortunately it's difficult on occasions to access the local service, but that should only be on occasions. The neonatal services as well, sometimes we have to take a Scotland-wide look at where cots are available, but the review, and again I would encourage you as a nurse working in the field to give us your views on the neonatal services review, because it is important with a growth in population as well that we get the right services in the right place. So this review has been kicked off, it's ongoing now, and at the end of that we will implement the recommendations to make sure that we get the right beds in the right places, but we'll make sure you get the contact details at the end.
Okay, Rosanna, do you want to take on Martin's point?
Was it Martin? Martin, thank you very much. Can I just say, I'm really pleased that you decided to ask your own question and not somebody else's question. The reason for that is because Nicola, First Minister, sometimes comes to those of us who get no questions, and at the end of it she wants us to say something. And I'd been listening to the people that had already talked about disabilities, And I had written down some things because I thought, I'm going to say something about that, disabilities and employment. And then up you popped. So you've given me a great opportunity here. So there's a few different things that we are trying to do to make a big change. First of all, we've noticed that not enough people with disabilities are getting onto modern apprenticeships, or it doesn't look like that's what's happening, because they have to sign the form and declare themselves as disabled, and of course a lot of people don't want to do that. So Skills Development Scotland are doing a big piece of work at the moment called an Equalities Action Plan to try and begin to turn that around so that we can begin to get more young people with disabilities into modern apprenticeships, not just disabilities, but obviously we're talking about race and gender as well. Disabilities is a big part of it. So that piece of work is ongoing at the moment. It's nearly finished, and we're hoping that that will make a change. The second thing is, I don't know whether you know, the two big programs that DWP operate at the moment, Work Programme and Work Choice. Now, Work Choice is the one that's designed for people with disability. And in 2017, the Work Programme, which is for people who are unemployed for a year or more, and Work Choice for disabilities, we're going to get control of those. And I'm looking right now at how we can make them work better. And the big thing that I want to do is if we could please, please, please focus on what people can do instead of focusing on what people can't do. I think that's such an important thing. And I'll tell you, I had an experience in the last week, and we've got to work really hard to design these new programs around that idea. But I had a really interesting experience in the last week. I sat at a big meeting and we were discussing the shortage in digital skills in Scotland. We need 11,000 new people to go into that business every single year. And I heard employers standing up and saying that amongst the people who came to work for them to do computer coding, and for those of you who don't know much about computers, that's the bit that's absolutely necessary to design the apps on your smartphone, design the video game, the games and things that you play with, and design all the software programs. The very best coders in their company, guess what? People with autism. Now, how do we get to young people early to make sure they get on that right path? And that's about focusing on their abilities and not their disabilities. And I think that's where we need to go in Scotland, and it's what I want to do when we get control of these programmes.
John, pensions.
On pensions, essentially the changes that nursing staff at the Southern General Hospital are having to come to terms with are essentially driven by the austerity agenda. There's choices to be made by the UK government. All these decisions have been taken at UK level. Legislation was passed that essentially raised the retirement age and put greater onus on individuals to pay for their own pension provision as part of the arguments around austerity. Now, of course, there are choices to be made in all of this. None of this austerity agenda is obligatory. There are different approaches could be taken to try to tackle the issue of long-term debt in the economy. What the UK government have decided to do is to stack that onto public sector workers, and they will stack it furthermore onto public spending in the spending review on Wednesday. Now, there are a particular group of women who are, because of their age, are particularly severely affected by that because the goalposts were moved really very abruptly and very close to the moment at which you would be eligible to retire at the earlier age. And that's a particular issue of hardship, which is the point that the Health Secretary was making, that boards should be sensitive to those particular requirements. But unfortunately, these issues are issues determined by legislation in the UK Parliament as part of the restoration of the public finances, and I'm afraid we have no discretion to change those decisions.
And what was the other subject I was to talk about? Look, a bit like my answer to Maggie's question, this will be a mixed audience. There'll be people here, I'm sure, who support independence, people who don't support independence. This won't come as any surprise. I do support independence, and I want Scotland I desperately want Scotland to be an independent country. I've always believed it, I always will believe it, and actually I'm more convinced now than I've ever been that we will become an independent country. But it's not going to happen just because I want it, or even with the greatest of respect, just because you want it. It will only happen when we convince a majority of people in Scotland. So that means we need to get out there and make the argument better. Now, as it happens, I think the UK government right now is helping us along the way in making the argument. You know, the more they fail to deliver on the promises they made, the more they cut our budget, the more they threaten to take us out of Europe, I think more and more people will see, you know, why do we have to put up with a Tory government we don't vote for? Wouldn't we be better to be independent and govern ourselves? But we've got the positive case to make as well. So those of us who believe it, the onus is on us to get out there and persuade the people we didn't persuade last year. And when we do that, when we build a majority, there'll be nothing and nobody can stand in our way. Yes. I think, even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't stop you. Yeah, that would never have worked. Yeah. Do you know? Well, the only way to get independence is through a referendum. Now, maybe some of these people were in the SNP back in the days you're talking about. I wasn't, because I'm far too young. But in the days when we said, if there's just a majority of seats, we'll be independent, that was a daft thing to say, because people, whether we like or not, vote SNP for all sorts of reasons. There's people who don't support independence who vote SNP, and I hope they will next year as well. And to get independence, you have to have people across the world that accept you as being independent. That's why you've got to have a clear decision taken in a referendum where there's no dubiety about what decision people are taking. So let's get out there, let's build the support, let's see these opinion polls rise, showing support, as they have done in every poll since the referendum. Support for independence has gone up. And when we see that there's majority support, that will be the time we know it's right to ask the question again. I wish sometimes there was a shortcut to this, because I want it as much as you do, but there isn't a shortcut. We've got to persuade a majority of people that it's the right thing to do. I'm not letting you ask another question, okay? You've had your fair share. Back to Joe.
Right. I kind of half wish that was the last question, because that'd be a great question to end on before we go for a cup of tea. But I have had the signal from the cheap seats upstairs that time is running out, so I'm able to take 3 more questions. Gentleman here.
Can I ask about nuclear safety? It was in the news in the past few days about a crack in the core in Hunterston, a nuclear power station. I understand it's the policy of the government not to build any new power stations, but also, strangely, to extend the ones that are there. I wonder how that can be consistent. If you're against nuclear power, why would you want to extend the ones that are already there, and even in terms of safety? But also, nearby, of course, we also have the Trident nuclear base. And I was wondering, just on a factual level, who's responsible for keeping us safe, just locally, in terms of what's going on there? I suspect it's probably the UK government, because it's the MOD. However, is there anything the Scottish government can do to make sure that we're safe from any leaks?
People keep sneaking in second questions. The young lady, second row right at the front here. Second. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kira, and I'm actually part of the group that Martin was previously talking about in We're Reach for Change. And we've been designing delivering training for autism, and we've been talking to nursery teachers and primary teachers and high school teachers, and we've started talking to pupils and just raising awareness for autism. And we're actually designing training for the local police as well. And we wanted to deliver, we're enthusiastic about what we're doing, and we're wondering about delivering training to people at the top end, like people at the cabinet as well. And we were wondering, how could we be supported by the work we do? for the work we do.
Okay. And I'm really sorry, there's loads and loads of people still with hands up, but remember there will be an opportunity to ask Cabinet Secretaries individually over a cup of tea. So the lady just there in the second row, 4 in from this side. Yeah.
Eleanor Robertson. I've met several of the ministers here tonight in my capacity as a board member within Scottish families affected by alcohol and drugs. And can I just thank the government for the support to both that organisation and the families that that organisation supports. My question, however, is about the inconsistency in the drug services throughout Scotland. I meet many people, and they have the issue that it depends on the ADP, completely depends on the ADP what their priorities are, and also really down to the psychiatrist who supports that ADP. We now have issues where people who have been told that they're going to be on methadone for 6 months can be on it for 18 to 20 years, not through their choice, but through the choice of the consultant that they're speaking to. Not all people will come off of methadone because some people are just not able to. But I think through the Road to Recovery, which was a very good document, each individual was to be treated with respect and to go forward with their treatment, and I'm afraid it's not happening in a lot of areas. I'm in touch with quite a lot of families. It seems to be a postcode lottery of where you are and what your psychiatrist thinks.
Okay. Kira? Yeah, I'm going to undertake, somebody will speak to you afterwards. It would be great to get you and your colleagues to come and talk to the Cabinet about autism awareness and training, so we can arrange for that to happen, okay? I have to warn you, they can be a difficult bunch to deal with, but I'll give you some tips.
And that's why we've been at the fore of policies like minimum unit pricing, which we're still pursuing through the court process at the moment. You make a good point, though, that our alcohol and drug partnerships are a mixed bag. They do have a level of variation, and that's something I think we want to look at as we bring those two areas of policy closer together. And what I'd be happy to do, Eleanor, is to keep you informed of how we might do that, to make sure that although there'll always be some local variation to respond to local needs, we have to make sure that the quality of the work carried out by alcohol and drug partnerships is good everywhere and is getting the help to people who need it most.
And I'll hand back to Jo now by thanking you for all your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. It was all going so well.
I'll just finish on a positive note about what I've seen here in Inverclyde, from one of the oldest buildings in the area to one of the newest buildings. I was visiting St Fillan's, the Killen Kirk, further up the road there with the local minister. 10th century church, obviously having right from the medieval period right up to 1700, 700 years. The church was in operation, and the can-do spirit of the local heritage trust that got together with a number of funders, including Historic Scotland, to consolidate the building there. And I was there with the local minister, right to when I went to the Beacons Art Centre to hear about some of the work with young people in the area, some of the fantastic dance that's going on, and perhaps also from the can-do and some of the questions we've had about looking about the capabilities of what people can do. And perhaps to Amy's point, I saw a video there of some of the pupils from, is it Craig Marlick School here, and many of them had communication issues and challenges and also mobility issues. But they put them, and they were involved, and these young people got into the harnesses in the fly set, and they were dancing and they were flying through the sky. And if we can give our young people, like those pupils from that school, the opportunities to be part of what is a wonderful cultural experience, that's the type of Scotland that we can have. And that was part of the spirit of what people can do, and that's what I've taken from a lot of the comments tonight. But it's happening here, and it's happening in Inverclyde. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. This has not just been the biggest audience that we've had at these events, but I think we've, according to my calculations, we've got through more questions than we've ever done before, and that's because you've been such a fantastic audience and sneaking in a few extra questions as well as we went along. So on behalf of the First Minister and the entire Cabinet, can I just say a huge thank you for coming along and for your questions tonight. If you give us a few minutes, Cabinet will leave the stage and we'll join you through in the saloon, where we can continue the discussion. The saloon, that's what it says on my bit of paper. Through in the saloon, where we can continue the discussion over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and just have a great chat. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the First Minister and the entire Cabinet, can I say a big thank you to you all. Thank you very much.